All right. This is Brother Sharif with the Hour of Power. We are here in Durham, North Carolina at New Community Center with the Moorish Science Temple. Glad to be here. Again, this is the Hour of Power of Brother Sharif. Go to Hour of Power, Sharif Hamid on YouTube. Subscribe and share the channel. We're here with Brother Shem of the Moorish Science Temple. And before we get into that, we have a lot of great interviews coming up and different things with the channel to lift the mind, body, and soul of our people. So again, we're here in Durham, North Carolina with Brother Shem at the Moorish Science Temple. Brother, you want to tell us about yourself and what you do with your movement before we get into the interview?
Yes, sir. And first, I want to thank you for coming once again and invite me to do this interview. Just to explain, I'll introduce myself. Again, my name is Brother Shem. I am an assistant Grand Sheikh of the temple here, Moorish Science Temple, here in Durham, North Carolina. And I'm also a Sunday school teacher. So on this particular Sunday, we just had our Sunday school class. We hold it on Sundays, as well as we have our Holy Day meetings on Friday. And as an assistant Grand Sheikh, one of my duties is basically to extend the learning of the teachings of the Moorish Science Temple of America to help uplift fallen humanity and to minister to those who are in need. That's basically it.
Okay. And in our first interview, you had told me before how you came into this knowledge, but for those who may have not have heard that, can you give us a brief introduction? Because I always like giving a backdrop and some history of how people came to where they are.
Yes, absolutely. So to recap on that story, I'm originally from New York, born and raised, and my first introduction to hearing about it, coming into the introduction of Moorish science, Noble Drew Ali in particular, was when I became a member of an organization in Islam known as the Ansar Allah community in Brooklyn. There was a book that was produced, and the name of the book was entitled Who Was Noble Drew Ali? And that was my first introduction to Noble Drew Ali. Years later, when I moved down here in North Carolina, I became interested in Moorish science. I did some self-study as far as to learning different things about the Moors, history, the importance of nationality, etc. And pretty much around 2012 or so, I was introduced to my Grand Sheikh, Brother Robert Stonell, the Sheikh here, and in 2013 is when I officially became a member of the Moorish Science Temple.
So time-wise, you really haven't been with it that long, time-wise.
Right.
I was just, when I met you at the, what's the program they have out there, the Oktoberfest? Phoenix Fest?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was like, man, that's a veteran there. You know, so to speak, they just had that, yesterday? Or was it Friday, Veterans Day? They observed Veterans Day here in America. But when I saw you, I said, that's a real veteran there. So I'm thinking you had 20-some years in the game. But you seemed like you learned a lot. So I just learned something that fast. You know what I mean? I thought you were, just the way you carried yourself, you know what I mean, your leadership qualities, I thought that you had at least 20 years into this. So that's a testament to your teacher and testament to yourself.
Thank you, brother. Definitely, I went through a lot, you know, to be. I think that, you know, with many of us who come into this movement, the Moorish movement, that we go through different experiences, and it prepares us for where we are at this point. So I'm just thankful. Right.
Before we get into the actual interview, back in February of this year, I had the honor of going to Greenville and speaking on ECU campus. A young brother by the name of Matthew Roberts invited me up there to speak on what's going on in the school system, you know, with our children. And so he told me the building to go to. And when I got there, I had the honor of running into a beautiful brother. And I'm hurt right now that I didn't have a chance to get to know him more, you know, but because of distance and everything, that was a little obstacle. Talking about Brother Ronnie L. You know, may he rest in peace. So before we, you know, I think it's only fitting before we get into the interview that you tell us about that brother and elevate his name and give him his due respect, because I felt a connection. I think that's a gift that God gave me. I can be around someone for a minute or two and I either get a positive vibe or a negative vibe. I may not say nothing to him, but that's probably a gift, you know, God has given us all, maybe more than others. But as soon as I came in contact with him, I just felt like you know, it's just something I can't explain, but it was all positive. And even though we didn't get to know each other more personally, he always supported me on Facebook. Like anytime I would do my talks with my channel, he would inbox me and say, hey, what about this and that? And I had actually planned to go back up there to speak with him and to do some programs, but just didn't get a chance to do it. So I know it's an emotional time. So he was a good brother. So yes.
Oh man. Thank you.
It's all right. And you know, one thing about us as black men, however you want to term it, here in America, we gotta learn how to express ourselves.
Thanks.
And there's nothing wrong with this. It's the reason why some of our black men are abusive, hitting women, hitting their children, shooting each other, because it's said you're not supposed to express yourself in that way. That's his tears, it's my tears. And this ain't no violent brother. So I can tell he's in tune with his emotions, and that's something we all, you know, have to learn how to do, how to express ourselves so we're not violent and destructive to one another. I deal in counseling. That's my profession. And I deal with children, black men, and a lot of us are so reckless, we don't know how to express ourselves. So it's nothing wrong with this, and I challenge anyone who will try to say it's something wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing at all. So I didn't mean to tap that into you, brother, but
No,
I had to respect this brother. Okay.
Yeah, so definitely honest to Brother Ronnie Anderson Hill. Excuse me, pardon me. So to basically give the brief story as to me and him meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I've been knowing him for over 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
This is before I came into the Moorish Science Temple of America.
Mm-hmm.
So basically how it came to be was I originally, before I moved to Durham, I lived in Snow Hill, which is a small town.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my father is originally from. And as I mentioned to you before Moorish Science, I studied teachings of the Ansar community,
Mm-hmm.
etc. I was actually teaching classes back then.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the first people to actually come to my classes. I would go to a sister, an elder's house. Her name is Miss Shelby Weaver. She opened up a home,
Mm-hmm.
and would have question and answer classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started teaching from there. And it was basically just, history of our people, spirituality, etc. And when me and him met, I met him, his other half, Sister Jackie, and immediately we actually built a friendship there. Because he's originally from New York, I'm originally from New York. We shared a lot of history, etc. So, as I said before, I've said to other people, I've watched him grow, but he has also watched me grow. He looked at me as a teacher, but I learned from him. A lot of things that I did as a progressive, as a teacher, I was not able to do without his assistance. And he wasn't a type of person he didn't have an ego with him. So he just wanted to help. For example, you mentioned about the situation when you taught down in Greenville. He played an important part in that because he secured the venue, which actually happened to be the same venue that I eventually started teaching at as well, before he passed. The last major event that he attended was the event here at the Hayti Center, where I taught with Dr. Aline Bay.
Right.
And the picture that you'll see on social media with me, him, as well as the other Moors, that was at that particular setting. So, you know, he's definitely he was a vital part in my journey and in my growth in this movement. So definitely.
Right. May he rest in peace. So moving along, it's in social media, it's been a document floating around. It is very, very serious to us as whatever you call yourself, you know, Black, African American. You already explained that, whatever we call ourselves, Black people in America, but we're the target. And I just want to go over and get your analysis, and anyone else is welcome to chime in on it. It's a government document. I went through a lot to get it. It's 12 pages long. It's official government document there. And for the audience, we have an audience here. It's 12 pages long. And it says, Black identity extremists likely motivated to target law enforcement officers. And when you go through it, it's basically, a lot of it is directed towards the Moorish Science Temple. So I'm gonna just read two short passages. It's really short, but it's deep. But it's 12 pages long, and then we'll discuss it. We'll have our brother Shem break it down for us. So in this classified document here, and I want to show it here and here, 12 pages long. It says it's an intelligent assessment from the FBI. So this is no joke. And it says the FBI assesses it's very likely, and they have an acronym for it now, BIE, which stands for Black Identity Extremists. So now they got a new term for us. Perceptions of police brutality against African Americans spurred an increase of premeditated, retaliatory, lethal violence against law enforcement that will likely serve as a justification for violence. So they're saying it's premeditated, and we're going to use some things that I'm going to read here as a justification for violence against the police. It says the FBI assesses it's very likely this increase began following the August 9th, 2014 shooting of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, in the subsequent grand jury November 2014 declined to indict the police officers involved. Stop right there. Police brutality has been going on since the inception of the police department. My undergrad is in criminal justice. The first police department was in 1838 in Boston, and even before that, they had paddy rollers. They used to call it the night watch. And in a short talk, they used to have a law in South Carolina that made the citizens get involved. Meaning, if you was a regular white citizen and they had this night watch and the paddy rollers, they would knock on your door and say, have you seen any loose niggers running around? Yeah, I saw one. He ran in my backyard. Well, tomorrow night, we're going to go look for him. Well, I don't really want to get involved with this. This is the white people talking. Well, no, you getting involved today. because we got a law that says if you don't help us patrol or do the night watch, we will fine you, and then eventually we'll take you to jail. So they, just like now they're making people choose sides, back then they made people choose sides. So with the shooting of Mike Brown, this is when this started. Very tricky with words, but moving along. It says the FBI assesses it's very likely incidents of alleged police abuse against African Americans since then have continued the feed of resurgence of ideologically motivated violent criminal activity within the BIE movement. Remember, that means Black Identity Extremists. The FBI assesses it's very likely some BIEs are influenced by a mix of anti-authoritarian, Moorish Science citizen ideology and BIE ideology. The FBI has high confidence of these assessments based on a history of violent incidents attributed to these individuals. When has the Moorish Science Temple ever been violent? On behalf of their ideological beliefs, documented the FBI investigations and other law enforcement or open source reporting. The FBI makes this judgment with key assumption in recent incidents of their ideology and its motivation. Finishing out, the FBI defines BIE or Black Identity Extremists as individuals who seek, wholly in part, through their unlawful acts of force or violence in response to perceived racism. Perceived? And injustice in American society. Some do so in furtherance of establishing a separate Black homeland, autonomous Black social institutions, communities, or governing organizations within the United States. The desire for physical or psychological separation is typically based on either their religious or political beliefs, which is sometimes formed around or includes the belief in racial superiority or supremacy. So no mention of the KKK. The mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric or generalized philosophic to embrace violent tactics may constitute extremism and may be constitutionally protected. The FBI defines sovereign citizen extremists as individuals who openly reject their U.S. citizenship. I wonder who they're talking about. Believe that most forms of established government, authority, and institutions are illegitimate. It is illegitimate. And seek wholly in part their unlawful acts to force or violence and further their claim to immune from government authority. The mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric or general philosophic to embrace violent tactics may constitute extremism. So they're saying even if you think about it, you're going on the list. And this may be constitutionally protected, and that it ends there. So I'm gonna stop right there. Sounds like the file back in the 60s. So I'm gonna keep it open in case you want me to refer back to anything, brother. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Sharif, for pointing that out. And I'm glad you mentioned it because there's certain things that you mentioned there, and I want to bring out to the public and educate them on some things. I actually have the file here, and for anyone who wants this file, you can actually Google this. You can actually look it up and access it. As of today, on the 11th, I should say the 12th of November, you can still get it on the internet if you wish to pull it down. But I want to, if you get this document in particular, you should pay close attention to page 5. And there's a reason why I said that. And just to bring some clarity, I know you said when you was reading it, you said Moorish Science citizen. Extremist the term is actually Moorish sovereign citizen extremist.
Now is that the way it's labeled in there? Because I just read it verbatim.
Yeah, I can actually, if you go to,
I was on page 2. That's what I was reading, page 2.
Because if you go to
It says more sovereign citizen
ideology,
Uh-huh.
correct?
Mhm.
So more science, more sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a point for that.
Mm-hmm.
If you look up the history, and anyone can look this up about sovereign citizens,
Mm-hmm.
sovereign city ideology, sovereign citizen movement, etc., you will learn that it originated with those of European descent.
Mm-hmm.
It was a movement that started in the 60s. We hear about the Patriot movement, etc.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those people were people in the South, as well as other parts, who identified with what we call white supremacist ideology.
So these were immigrants coming in?
No, when I say European descent, I mean those who are classified as white.
Okay.
Right? But we know that they're not Americans. We know that their ancestors are
Right.
from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say, when I say Europeans, when we in the Moorish Science Temple say Europeans, we mean those people who identify themselves as white in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So these particular individuals, and technically they are immigrants, so if you want to go there, but these particular individuals, these sovereign citizens, it was something that they created for them, and somehow it crept in to the Moorish movement. And I want to make this point clear. Okay, so with that being said, I want to read this on page 5.
Okay.
This is from the FBI file, and it's on the footnote of it.
So you're at the very bottom.
I'm at the very bottom.
Okay, I got you.
At the footnote of page 5.
Mm-hmm.
It says, Moorish sovereign citizens are a loose network of mostly African Americans who believe they are sovereign entities who do not recognize the authority of the U.S. government. Moorish sovereign citizen ideology derives from the Moorish Science Temple of America, a non-violent religious and cultural movement founded in 1913 by Noble Drew Ali, and he misspelled Noble, who taught his followers they were not Negroes but Moors, people of North African, Berber, and Arab descent. Some Moorish adherents adopt sovereign citizen strategies to assert diplomatic immunity by claiming membership in fictitious Native American tribes, claiming descent from settlers who arrived in North America during the pre-Columbian era, or identifying as foreign nationals or ambassadors, and it pretty much stops there and it gives its source. The point of me talking about this particular footnote is the fact that when it was describing the Moorish sovereign citizens, it was describing them as violent. When it got to the Moorish Science Temple of America, it said it's a nonviolent religious and cultural movement. It didn't say it was an extremist movement. Why do I want to make that point? The reason why I want to make that point is this. People in the government know that what they're identifying as Moorish sovereign, and you have people who say that they're not sovereign citizens. That's to be debated. But my point of it, those who they've identified, they know that whatever that ideology is did not come from the Moorish Science Temple of America. They know that that is an offshoot of people who have adopted a European ideology. Now, with that being said, that's to make clear. So what we have now is people who have taken on the name of being a Moor, basically, right? And they have said, okay, I'm a Moor, and because I'm a Moor, I don't have to pay taxes, I can squat in the house, etc., etc. Just a number of things. And not all of them think that or do that. So, for those who may take offense, but there are those who do that. We see that in the news. There in the North Carolina, there's a sovereign citizens task force that was originated in Greensboro. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. That was started back a few years ago by 2 detectives. And what they do, or what they have done, is they have collected basically all these documents to know the language that is used by those who practice this ideology, those practices. And what ended up happening was the term Moorish national, Aboriginal. Those terms kept coming up. And this is something anybody can look up. This is not something I'm making up. And I'm not saying it to speak radical against anybody. So we have to recognize the difference. It's just like, for example, you're a Muslim. You're of the Muslim faith. You know what your faith is about. However, Islamophobia states that all Muslims are prone to terrorism. You see what I'm saying? And you know good and well that those people who profess to be Muslims that are carrying out terrorist acts are not really Muslim. So that's all we're saying in here. Now, could we say that this is somehow a way for people in the government to launch a broad attack on all of our people, regardless of what they call? Sure. But we have to be clear and distinct to know that, we have to know what we are as opposed to what they're saying we are. That gets into the conversation of what we identify ourselves as. When you came here early on in the Sunday school, we talked about the name of identity, the meaning of identity, and I want to stress this to anyone who's viewing this and to the audience here, is that in the Moorish Science Temple of America, we stress nationality because you can say, well, it doesn't matter what you call yourself, but in law, and they tell you there's no ignorance of the law is no excuse. In law, they know that nationality determines your political status. So it's like this, brother. Okay, if they ask you who you are, right? And let's say you say, I'm a black man, okay? And in your mind, you know what black means to you. You know that it identifies with a pride, right. Because you come and you may have listened to Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, all the greats who use that term, and that's fine and that's well and that's good. Now the question becomes, because you have an idea of what it is, does that mean that they will respect you based on your idea of what it is? And the criteria, what is the criteria that they're using on how they relate to you? See, the one thing that we did with nationality is we say that nationality ties to your history and your culture, right? Because every group of people on the planet that have a history and a culture have a nationality. That's why we are very clear in how we identify ourselves. Not to criticize those who take on whatever term they want to call themselves. That's your freedom, right? At the end of the day, we spoke about that. But know that when it comes to how you're being dealt with in this world, nationality plays a key part. That was the one thing many of our leaders never addressed. They never addressed how our political status is based on our nationality. Marcus Garvey, who we give high honors to, said we want a nationality. That's what he is quoted as saying. We want a nationality like the Irish, the Germans, the English, etc. We want that. So we saying in the Moorish Science Temple of America that we do have a nationality. We're going to proclaim that nationality and stand on that, and we're not going to let anyone tell us otherwise. So that was just, I wanted to just give my insight.
That's a very great and deep insight. my next question about this document, even though they distinguished on page 5 that the Moorish Science Temple
Yes, sir.
is not a violent group as compared to page 2, it said the Moorish Science citizens or
Sovereign citizens.
more sovereign citizens
Yes, sir.
could be violent. Do you still think this is directed at the root? Because with anything, you got to go to the root of where someone is getting their teaching. So is the Moorish Science Temple the root of this ideology that they're saying? No?
It's not.
Okay.
But to your point, I do know that there are attempts to associate the two. You see what I'm saying? Because of the fact that when you, like we just read, that they said it derives from it.
Right.
See, the language is
Very
they
tricky.
tricky with their language. So if they can say that it derives from this, then they can try to attribute. It's just like you have sons, right? Whatever your sons do as they grow older,
It's gonna
that's
boomerang
a reflection
back to
on
me.
you.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So in a sense, in a greater sense, these brothers and sisters out here who take on that ideology, they are like children of this movement, but they went off and did their own thing. But still, in this society, they are, they looked upon as, well, that comes from there.
Right.
Right. But no, it's not the root, the teachings. They adopted other teachings, foreign teachings, and we have to be clear in that. Just as our people have adopted foreign religions, we have adopted foreign names. Right. Malcolm X talked about it. They robbed us of our religion, our God. You see what I'm saying? Our history, our culture. We have adopted these foreign things that we have to recognize and correct. So that's what it is.
So and you're educating me while we're talking. Just to put things in its proper context, did anyone outside of Marcus Garvey lay down the sovereign citizenship, us knowing who we are as it relates to law, before Noble Drew Ali?
Well, to be clear, as far as law, well, again, we got to know in the terms that we use. If you look at the writings and teachings of Noble Drew Ali, you will not see the term sovereign citizen.
Okay.
You will not see that. So we got to be clear on that. You won't see it from Marcus Garvey. You won't see that. You'll see nationality.
Okay.
Right.